This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
This is Raise Your Game. I'm Christine Wong. Oftentimes, as a leader, it's not just the physical or the fiscal obstacles that you have to jump over. A lot of the times, the problem is also kind of in your head. So here with me today is Lorraine Chang, founder and CEO of Ascension Associates, to discuss a few mental obstacles leaders regularly encounter and how to deal with that.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Christine. So first of all, for all my new Malaysian audience, I'm from Hong Kong, so I'm not from Malaysia, I'm from Hong Kong. So I'm the founder and CEO of Ascension Associates, where we research, train, and coach leaders across Asia.
Great. So, speaking of coaching leaders, much like I said earlier, there are a lot of problems and a lot of obstacles that leaders go through, but a lot of the time, the problem is not necessarily on the surface. A lot of them are sort of in your head, right? So tell me a little bit about, the most common, I suppose, like mental fallacies that you'll see leaders encounter on a regular basis.
I see two, basically. One of them is the problem of linear thinking, which we have just covered in our pilot leadership development workshop. Because a lot of the time where people go and see it, especially, when they're in a situation where they need to put out fires, a lot of them are being kind of trained or put in a situation where they cannot think of anything else other than focusing and laser focusing on the problem right in front of their eyes. And most of the time, because of our training, especially deeply rooted in our education system, a lot of the times we only see like 1 + 1 equals to 2. So, when we see a problem, the only solution that we think is like, oh, if it happens, it must be because of A, that kind of like causation effect. And that kind of linear thinking actually give us more problems rather than helping us to solve the problems or solve the problem for the short term, for the time being, but it doesn't really like get rid of the entire thing for the longer term. And another like mental fallacy, which is more personal, and that is actually what we cover a lot of the times in executive coaching sessions. It's the what we call the impostor syndrome. Imposter syndrome is actually what we think that we are not good enough, we are fake, and hence you might have actually heard of the phrase "fake it till you make it." But, in our coaching sessions, in our workshops, we actually advocate our leaders, work it till you make it instead of like fake it till you make it. Because when you're fake it till you make it, you know that you're an imposter, you know that you're deceiving people. So that kind of like reinforce the entire thing. And it happens a lot in times during transitions or when people get promoted too early or when people are very experienced, but they are thrown in situations where they have never faced before. So, they don't have any past track record or past experiences to draw on. And then also then you're asking them, in a very senior position to solve this problem in front of everybody, right? And they are accountable. They are like these CEOs or C-1, like very prolific. So what do, right? So all of us are human beings. We would all go through emotions like, I don't know what to do, fear, uncertain, anxious, worrisome, and that's just like very normal. But on top of that, if we actually don't understand what these mental fallacies do to us, it actually hinder a lot of the, not just the execution, but the development of these leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, so you mentioned two of these sort of problems. You've got linear thinking and you've got imposter syndrome. So maybe let's start with linear thinking first and sort of break that down a little bit. From your definition, it's sort of having those blinkers on in a way. There, I think, is a thin line between being focused on a task and being blind to other solutions to the task as well, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, the problem, I think, with having blinders on is that you often aren't aware that they're on there. You often maybe don't think of yourself as a linear thinker, or you don't realize that you're doing that. So how do you even identify the problem in the first place?
This is a very good question. And for me, it takes some practices and some time to realize I'm also a victim of linear thinking sometimes. It nowadays, when I set up the litmus test, when I go experiment with my coaching clients at that level, I just ask them to ask themselves when I'm not there with them all the time, is to ask yourself the question of three. It's simple. For example, let me just give you like a very personal example. So a few months ago, I had this like shoulder pain, and it just won't go away. So I thought, oh, because I had shoulder pain before, I thought I would go back to my spine doctor because I thought it because of the bad posture or whatever, like sliding too much cell phone and whatever, right? And then it's the same spine doctor. He treated me all right the last time. But then this time it's the same shoulder pain, but then he couldn't treat me. I exactly went back to him for 3 times, spent quite a bit of money, and say shoulder pain won't go away. And I had to stop to ask myself, like, hold on one second. It has been intensive treatment. I've been going back to him exactly for 3 times. Why is it still not working? Now, some of the times when people actually got so much into linear thinking, they would go on and say, don't give up, keep trying, keep working harder. And this is actually very common especially when you're going through corporate innovation transformation projects, right? You just have to grind through, right? Grind till you own it. But then there are times where you need to set up the litmus test and say, this is actually not working. We have to stop and take a pause and see, like, hey, this is actually where we're going to the mental fallacy of linear thinking. This is not working. What's happening? And so I just stop myself and say, hold on one second. How come my spine doctor couldn't treat me this time? What is the real cause for me of having this shoulder pain out of nowhere? And then I realized because I was launching this regional well-being project. And then I realized I was actually going through a lot of stress because I don't know what the turnout's going to be. I was worried about the outcome. And a few days later, after I woke up, I realized I got jaw pain. So it turns out I was so stressed that actually I was kind of like biting my teeth real tight when I was sleeping. That's why I woke up and was like, just like right about this area, like my jaw is like, this is like weird. And that helped me to understand, like, hey, hold on one second. My shoulder pain is just like an extension of my jaw pain because I've been sleeping. I thought I was sleeping. I was, but I was treating my body as if I was being beaten up because I was in such a stressful mode. That's why my spine doctor, with all his like, show on the medical bed and whatever treatment that he used to use on me didn't work. Mm-hmm. And so that was a linear thinking. My doctor failed to treat me this time and actually failed to gain my trust further because he didn't actually go deep enough to ask me, how have I been sleeping? What have been going on for even these few days? How's work? Because apparently my spine was fine. He thought that I was not okay, but actually there is a right obvious symptom right in front of him. Because he said, Lorraine, your neck muscle is so tight. I couldn't even like twist your neck. Not twist my neck, but you know what it is.
Yeah.
Spine doctor. And so, but then he just stopped there. He didn't ask me what happened. And then that comment got me thinking, yeah, you're right. Why am I so tight? Oh, because I was actually stressed. So I was a doctor myself. I diagnosed myself and then I got out of that.
So I think what's interesting about this is that, I think both in this particular anecdote, right, both you and the doctor essentially had the same fallacy of linear thinking. You kind of kept feeling it has to be a spine thing, it has to be a spine thing. And he also did not or they did not afford you the, any more questions to look more into it because they also assumed that it was the same problem as before or that it was an extension of the previous issue, right? So, I think the sort of takeaway from that is, there's got to be a point where I think you have to determine what kind of wall you're up against that is stopping you from, getting the result that you want, right? Is it, are you completely looking in the wrong direction? Is it just a wall that you have to come back from?
Exactly.
Like, sometimes you do have to sort of, it sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes you have to know when to quit in order to move ahead.
Exactly. When do you need to, what kind of baggage you need to leave behind totally so that actually you can move forward because you cannot just keep on walking with more and more rocks on your back. And the same thing is, and thank you so much, Christine, for actually putting it out in that way. I think it's actually the difficulty of looking at the same situation, but with different angle, with the fresh eyes. It sounds so cliche. Oh, let me actually have someone have a fresh eyes. But sometimes when that independent third party is not available for whatever reason, how do we as leaders, enable ourselves and our team to see the same situation with fresh eyes, with a new perspective? Maybe the same problem this time, but different root cause. Different root cause, different solutions.
Yeah.
And the linear thinking mental fallacy is because, on top of that, especially, right, with a lot of Asians, grind till you own it, you don't give up, you keep on working harder, it's just because you haven't given enough hours, then the sunk cost is higher because now you're putting in the same solution. Imagine I just go back to the spine doctor every single day. My neck and shoulder pain wouldn't go away, but then I just keep on working harder and say, oh, it's just because of something was wrong, whatever. But then, if you look at it from a corporate perspective, that means actually we are throwing in more and more dollars into the same thing, but you're not getting any result out of it. And it turns out you get frustrated, you get burnout, and then, the whole story.
And I think it's also really difficult when you do put, so much effort into solving a problem to admit that maybe you're going about it wrong. Honestly, it's difficult. It's embarrassing to admit that you've made a mistake or that you have, sunk resources into something that was not going to work. That is a difficult thing to adjust for sometimes and to admit to yourself and maybe to your colleagues or your peers or your subordinates as well, to come out and be like, we actually sort of need to scrap this because this is not the right move. It's tough, right? So I think that's why it's easier to fall into the trap of linear thinking because at least you think you're right.
Yeah. And then it goes back in the same imposter syndrome because it kind of now you see, the point where I'm trying to make, because the imposter syndrome is like, Christine, I don't think I'm good enough.
Yeah.
Right? I can't solve this. So what do you do normally? The linear thinking tells you, work harder. You overcompensate. But then you're not taking the step back. You're not having the space for yourself to see clearly what is really going on. Are we really not good enough? And by what standard? By whose judgment? What is good? What is the definition of good this time? Maybe, this time definition of good is different. For a lot of the Scrum Masters and Agile coach out there, they know what I mean. The definition of done is different every single time for different projects. So it's same for leadership. Human beings are dynamic. We're not supposed to be monolithic. And same with my neck and shoulder pain. The last time it was back posture. This time is because of the stress that I was giving on myself.
Absolutely.
And in a way, it was also kind of like imposter syndrome in a way, because why would I actually go so stressed and anxious to a point where I was grinding my teeth and having jaw pain and then end up having neck and shoulder pain because of something that actually I shouldn't be worried about in the first place. I could have just sat down, meditate a little bit, just chill out and then go talk to my partners and go work it out.
Yeah. I think that that's definitely one of the solutions, but I think imposter syndrome is a very complicated beast as well. So we do have to take a short break for some messages. But after that, I will continue speaking to Lorraine Chang, founder and CEO of Ascension Associates, about the mental fallacies in leadership here on Raise Your Game on BFM 89.9.
Be free-minded. BFM 89.9, the business station.
You're listening to Raise Your Game. I'm Christine Wong, and I have Lorraine Chang, founder and CEO of Ascension Associates, on the line with me today, and we're talking about some mental fallacies in leadership. And before the break, we primarily touched on the idea of linear thinking, and now we're sort of moving into the second fallacy that Lorraine highlighted before the break, which is imposter syndrome. Now, one thing I would love to delve into, we were already kind of getting into it a little bit before the break, but the first thing that I want to do is point out something that I find quite interesting. When I said to a colleague of mine today that I was going to talk about imposter syndrome, he looked at me and went, okay, what is imposter syndrome? And I said, okay, well, the fact that you're asking means you don't feel it. Because it's something that is so I think it's a more common problem than people think that it is. Number one, I think that a lot of people assume that everyone else around them knows exactly what they're doing or feels that they have everything figured out, and I certainly don't think that is the case, and you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But first of all, I think let's break down what exactly imposter syndrome is. How does it manifest in your thought process?
That is a good one. That is a good one, Christine. And you can see that actually I'm just taking out my notes.
Yes. For our listeners, Lorraine has just whipped out a sheaf of papers.
Exactly. It's actually a very timely thing that I dug up from my papers because exactly, in my coaching training school, we talk about coaching the imposter syndrome. What exactly is it and, why is it so common? So, if we talk about the very academic definition of it, it can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence success. But sometimes in what we see in the workplace is that, some people, they are, really at a stage where they are not that, let's just say let me rephrase it. Let's say they just got promoted to a certain point. They're not absolutely ready for it. So they know they're not absolutely ready for it, but they don't know how to actually get this kind of feeling of inadequacy, of anxiety to others. So they either overcompensate or they cover it up. So imposter syndrome, like you said, is actually a very complicated thing, and it can be manifested in different ways. Now, for people who have constant success, they might actually, manifest in front of you as like a perfectionist, as a superhero, as an expert, or as a soloist. So for perfectionists, because even though that they have been having constant success, but they still feel that they are not good enough. So, they overcompensate by being, I need to be perfect in this. And sometimes when we are working in projects, I'm sure the audience listening to us will understand, I can see some trace in there. But now I'm not saying that every single person who's exhibit traits of a perfectionist is suffering from imposter syndrome, but that can be just like one way of it. But, if we're talking about perfectionists, it can be the fact that, for example, I need to be really good at this.
Yeah.
I need to make sure every single thing is perfect to my standard so that I don't feel like inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing for superhero, for soloist, for experts. And I think, in our real cases, coaching senior leaders, especially when they are transitioning to a new role, when they got promoted, and they know that, there are certain skill set that they're not good enough, but they are thrown in a situation where they need to just like roll up the sleeves and run with it. And that's like the scariest point for them, because they know that, I'm not really good enough, despite my previous success, but my previous success doesn't guarantee me success in this role. So what do I do right now? And a lot of the times, especially in Asia, not every single senior person is really is willing to talk about these things,
right?
Even with independent third parties or with like other people.
So
that kind of like also affects the entire thing of how they overcome this.
Yeah, I think first of all, one interesting note that you've mentioned is that sometimes with imposter syndrome is because you don't have a frame of reference for what success looks like in that position.
Exactly.
It's that kind of thing of, if you had straight A's in school, you kind of have a rough idea that you're probably going to do well in university because you had straight A's in school. Like you at least have that basis of, I normally do well in school and therefore. But when you're entering, let's say a new industry, a new job, a new position, even if you got a new promotion as well and you've never been in that position of authority, you have nothing really to compare your performance to apart from other people's. And that is like that level of comparison is not helpful to anyone because, like you said, people are people. We're not monolithic, and we certainly don't all work the same way. What works for one person does not necessarily work for another one. So I think that's one thing. And then the second thing that I love about that is you mentioned that a big part of imposter syndrome is feeling like you didn't do enough. And it's like, enough is a wild word. I don't think it's physically
what is
possible.
enough?
I don't think it's physically possible to ever do quote unquote enough for anything, because what is that defined as? For some people, I think that's why there's this whole conversation now as well around like quiet quitting and things like that, right? Where it's like, to a lot of people nowadays who have this sort of who are experiencing this sort of phenomenon, enough to them means, they just do their job. They go to work and they do the 9 to 5, and then they come back home. And a lot of other people are arguing that it's certainly not enough. You have to go above and beyond. And then at what point does that stop, right? When does above and beyond stop also? So I find that all fascinating. I think that all these sort of societal pressures and that feeling of, I don't know what enough is and I don't know what good is. And so how can I be doing good enough if I don't know what the two are?
And sometimes, now let's not get into the quiet quitting, because with research business, I can tell you there's a lot other stories behind
it's a very complicated thing. I'm just saying that as like an example of like enough as a definition. Yeah.
But I think with the societal pressure, the lack of frame of reference, lack of a sounding board, all these values that we have to go above and beyond, especially for a lot of high achievers we've seen. Like what you said, you just mentioned, the people with straight A's in school, they have been kind of like, I wouldn't say programmed, but in a way it's really programmed that they have to do everything good and perfect in every single arena. But what I'm trying to do is we have coaches, senior leaders, and talk about this in leadership development workshops with our clients, is that we have to understand the biggest difference between the school and outside school is that in school, yes, it makes sense. You got straight A's, you for sure guarantee a ticket to any school that you want, right? You fix the B's and the C's, and then you guarantee you got a scholarship of some sort. But when you leave school, it doesn't matter anymore. Just because you got straight A's in your sales KPI and what have you, it doesn't guarantee promotion. It doesn't guarantee you that actually, as a people leader, you know what to do when you have kind of like stumble upon a situation where you have never faced before, right? Because as a senior leader, everything is becoming more and more fluid, more and more volatile, more and more dynamic. You just can't just go back to the closet and say, oh, let me go pull some old tricks and then I'll be good.
Like, it's as easy as saying that life just gets more complicated as you get older, honestly.
Yeah, it is. And so, we have to kind of like understand, when we are overcoming this imposter syndrome, we have to understand what narrative are we focusing? Are we focusing on the not good enough bit? Or are we focusing on how can I be good enough bit? And what does good enough look like for me and for others? And how do we find a consensus? In fact, I'm reading the book Fallacies. I'm just in the middle of like finishing the last chapter. I think one of the good points is, let's say, for example, a lot of high achievers, and I used to be like that as well. We just love to have a longer and longer to-do list. Like by the time we finish the school, finish the work, I'm like, how come actually I have more to-dos than the beginning of the day? But then what Fallacies is trying to say is, why don't we have like a done for the day list? What does done for the day look like? Because unless you retire and stop working like full stop, right? Our to-do list would never stop.
Yeah.
Right. For example, I'm running a business. Unless I touch wood, unless I shut it down, I will have more to-dos. It's just a natural game of what we are in. So what is done for the day? What does good look like? And what can I do? And this is actually what the well-being bit actually comes in. We have to actually take into the consideration of our well-being when we are taking in all this pressure, especially when we talk about, imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough. Because the more negative thoughts that you're giving yourself, the less space you're creating yourself for embracing the positivity, the possibility, the ability to ask for help, to collaborate, and to embrace new ideas that actually, maybe the solution is right in front of you. Just take my neck and shoulder pain as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that actually about brings us to the end of our show. But thank you so much to Lorraine for talking to me about some mental fallacies in leadership today.
Thank you so much, Christine.
You've been listening to Raise Your Game. I'm Christine Wong. I've been speaking to Lorraine Chang, founder and CEO of Ascension Associates, all about mental fallacies in leadership. And if you've missed any of today's chat, you can go ahead and catch up. We are, of course, on our app. It's the BFM app that's available on the Apple App Store and Google Play. And you can also head over to bfm.my to listen to this podcast and many more. You're tuned in to BFM 89.9.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.